My name is Dee Robinson, and I'm the administrator for Kentucky Citizens Against Animal Abuse and Domestic Violence. I am not an animal rights activist, and I do not support and will not support the Humane Society of the United States. I will not support any legislation that would deny hunters their legal rights or traditions, and I will not support restrictive legislation regarding animal agriculture or regulatory restrictions on good farmers and breeders. I promote human and animal welfare, and I promote them together because research has proven interpersonal violence and domestic pet cruelty are connected. Batters who commit pet abuse have higher rates of physical and sexual violence, male privilege, isolation, blaming, intimidation, and threats. 71% of animal abusers will also abuse seniors, children, vulnerable spouses, and partners. Animal abusers are 5 times more likely to commit violent crimes against people. There's a dark side in our society, an element we need to rid ourselves of. Because most Kentuckians live in harmony with their pets. We see them with our children as vulnerable, yet equally responsive to our care and love. Many of us consider them our kids, our fur babies. We post photos of them on Facebook. We share them with our friends in times of joy and in times of grief. We brag on them and we love on them. Most of us grew up with pets as children, and because we learned to have a healthy and respected relationship with them, we will grow up with them as adults, and hopefully we will grow old with them as seniors. For many, they are the sole source of affection and companionship. God gave man dominion over all the animals, but with this authority came responsibility. So the thought that anyone would deliberately hurt them when there are so many who do what they can to protect them is repulsive. We turn away in disbelief. Please do not turn away today. Evil and abusive people do not, will not, and cannot distinguish between skin and fur. They do not discriminate between their victims. They're bullies and cowards. They would just as easily allow a dog to starve and languish helplessly in its own body waste as a bedridden senior, or they would severely beat a cat as well as hurt a child. So why do we classify some obvious acts of torture against pets as misdemeanors? And why do we give them a second chance to torture a pet before classifying the crime as a felony? When they cross the line and they go from poor pet ownership skills to domestic pet torture, their intent and the result is the same: to inflict pain and suffering. Did you know that 1 out of 3 women in Kentucky will be victims of domestic violence in their lifetime? 85% of all the women who do escape domestic violence and seek shelter report there was already animal abuse going on before they even left. 65% of the domestic violence victims stay in their homes to protect their pets against abusers. The swift prosecution of extreme domestic pet crimes and cross-reporting could be a useful tool in Kentucky's defense against interpersonal violence, because animal crimes are most often the most visible sign that vulnerable humans are in danger. Knox County children found abandoned in an attic with 5 dogs. Fort Campbell man skins his wife's dog in the bathtub while she is forced to watch. Greensboro, North Carolina man rapes a child after having sex with a dog. Crimes like this happen every day. We can't incarcerate animal abusers because we believe they will commit crimes against vulnerable humans in the future, as statistics would indicate. But we can reconsider the severity of the punishment associated with their torturous crimes. We can pass a stronger law that has provisions to remove them from a caring society and would allow those living with them to go on with their lives without fear of future abuse. The children are so emotionally scarred when they have this experience of violence. If we stand together on this like you did last year with the anti-dogfighting bill, we can unanimously pass a simple piece of legislation that modifies 525-135, elevating the punishment for the most heinous crimes against our domestic pets to felony status. We need reasonable, limited, carefully worded legislation imposing punishments that are equitable with the crimes. Let's team up with our Kentucky special interest groups to be sure we do not infringe on any of their hunting rights, and with our county attorneys, because no matter how good the bill is and how well it reads, if they cannot prosecute the crime, it's not worth the effort I'm asking you to make here today. Legislation must include first offense, gross neglect, excessive abuse, and sexual assault. The key is intent. When an abuser intends to cause or acknowledges the possibility of extreme pain or the probability of death because of their actions, the crime should be considered a felony, not a misdemeanor. I'm asking you to expand the existing Kentucky statute 525-135 and establish the following three first-time offenses as Class D felonies in Kentucky. These acts include, but are not limited to, number one, gross and deliberate neglect, including deprivation of food, water, lack of shelter that protects a domestic pet from temperature extremes, and or the deprivation of needed medical attention, all of which cause the trauma associated with the probability of death or the result of near death to a cat or dog through negligence and or abandonment. Currently, cases of abandonment and neglect are covered under Kentucky Statute 525-130, and they're collectively considered Class A misdemeanors. But gross negligence is a passive form of intentional torture. The pain of an animal that's deliberately allowed to linger with untreated illness or wounds such as this can be tremendous and ultimately lead to death. Animals that are intentionally starved experience painful symptoms throughout each stage of their physical deterioration. Yet these examples are both considered misdemeanors. And so are these, and so are these. Every year, pets are abandoned with no remorse and left to die, while some remain with their owner through suffering and probable death. But they are all helpless and unable to care for themselves as they languish in unbearable pain. Leaving pets outside like this and exposed without shelter are both considered to be misdemeanors. But during extreme cold spells, it's not uncommon for animal control officers to find companion animals, often chained dogs, literally frozen to the ground. Those who deliberately commit acts of gross neglect, knowing the dangers, aren't ignorant. They're heartless criminals. Consider the mindset of these people, and then ask yourself if a hand slap is enough to prevent them from doing this to another pet, or allowing them to care for a vulnerable human being. Number two, torture, or extreme and deliberate physical abuse motivated by intent or disregard that increases or prolongs the pain of an animal for punishment, self-pleasure, lack of conscience, with the knowledge that this act will create serious physical injury, create a substantial risk of death, or that causes maiming, protracted disfigurement, protracted impairment of health, or impairment of the function of a limb or bodily organ. These acts go far and beyond an acceptable defense of corrective punishment, training, or discipline. And I'm sure our special interest groups would agree. The people who commit these crimes have deep-seated anger issues and the need of control. Crimes of torture may include dragging pets behind a car, skinning them, burning them, dismembering them, electrocuting them, hanging them, poisoning them, even beating them. Animal abusers are known to punish in silent vulnerable human victims forced to watch acts like this to prevent them from leaving a violent relationship and to illustrate what could happen to them if they don't submit. And then there are those who torture pets for perverted self-pleasure, practice, and or lack of conscience. First offense acts such as these that demonstrate the intent to cause extreme physical pain regardless of the consequences should be automatically elevated to a Class D felony. You shouldn't get a second chance to commit a torturous act upon a defenseless pet. Number 3, the sexual assault of an animal. When a person touches, contacts, or causes an object or another person to touch or contact the mouth, anus, or sex organs of an animal or an animal carcass for the purpose of arousing or gratifying the desire of a person or animal, or causes the animal to have sexual contact with a human. I am not going to show you photos of dogs being raped to get your attention. The fact that there is no law in Kentucky that prohibits the sexual abuse of an animal is disturbing enough. 41 other states have passed such legislation because of the deviant nature of the criminals who commit these acts and have added them to sexual abuser registries. The sexual abuse of animals is often linked to the sexual abuse of women and children. Animal sexual abusers may interchangeably abuse animals and children to enhance, expand, or extend their perverted pleasures against both powerless and unsuspecting victims. Good people do not commit crimes of gross neglect and or extreme physical abuse of domestic pets or sexually abuse animals. Can you even imagine the heartache of those who love their pets as you do, to see them tortured and maimed, or experience the pain that animal feels at the hand of someone they trusted? Those who do these things are not ill-informed or ignorant. They're the worst members of our society because they violate the very bond we have with our pets as established with our God-given dominion. We can never stop these crimes, but we can properly punish those who commit them. I am asking for legislation that will add the acts of gross neglect of a domestic pet and sexual assault of an animal to the Kentucky Statute 525-135 and make all first offense cases that are classified domestic pet torture Class D felonies with the appropriate pre- and post-conviction stipulations. I thank you for the privilege of your time.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson.